Black belt asked a black man to fight as a joke. What he did next silenced the whole gym. The afternoon sun filtered through the tall windows of Elite Combat Academy, casting long shadows across the polished wooden floors. I think most people would describe the atmosphere as intense, maybe? The sound of gloves hitting heavy bags echoed through the spacious gym, mixed with the occasional grunt of effort and the sharp commands from various instructors scattered around the facility. Jasmine Torres adjusted her pristine black belt for what felt like the 100th time that day. At 28, she had worked incredibly hard to earn her position as one of the Academy's most respected instructors. Her technique was flawless, perhaps even intimidating to some, and her students knew better than to question her methods. She had that kind of presence, the type that made people step aside when she walked past. But lately, something had been bothering her. Maybe it was the way some of the newer students looked at her with barely concealed skepticism, or perhaps it was the constant pressure to prove herself in what was still, let's be honest, a male-dominated environment. Whatever it was, Jasmine found herself becoming more aggressive in her teaching style, more willing to make examples of people. The evening beginners class was winding down, and Jasmine surveyed the group of students as they practiced their basic forms. Most were the usual suspects, middle-aged professionals trying to get in shape, a few college kids looking for an easy PE credit, some soccer moms who'd watched too many action movies. Nothing particularly interesting, she thought. Then her eyes landed on Marcus Williams. He stood toward the back of the group, maybe 6 feet tall, with a lean but solid build that suggested he wasn't completely out of shape. What caught Jasmine's attention, though, wasn't his physique, it was his posture. There was something about the way he held himself that seemed, different. Too relaxed for someone who claimed to be a complete beginner. Marcus had been coming to classes for about 2 weeks now. He was quiet, polite, always paid attention during instruction. But Jasmine noticed he never seemed to struggle with the basic techniques the way other beginners did. His movements were too smooth, too natural. It bothered her, though she couldn't quite put her finger on why. "All right, everyone," Jasmine called out, her voice cutting through the ambient noise of the gym. "Let's wrap up with some light sparring demonstrations. I want to show you the difference between someone who's trained seriously and someone who's just winging it." The students gathered around the central mat area, forming a loose circle. Jasmine loved this part of the class, the chance to display her skills to remind everyone why she wore the black belt. It was important to maintain that hierarchy, that respect. Her eyes scanned the group again, and almost without thinking, she pointed directly at Marcus. "You," she said, a slight smile playing at the corners of her mouth. "Marcus, right? Why don't you come up here and help me demonstrate some basic defensive positions?" I think what happened next surprised everyone, including Marcus himself. He hesitated for just a moment, not out of fear, but something else. Something that looked almost like reluctance. "Ma'am, I don't think that's necessary," Marcus said quietly, his voice respectful but firm. "I'm still learning the basics. Maybe someone else would be better for a demonstration." Jasmine's smile widened, but there was something less friendly about it now. She'd encountered this type of student before, the ones who tried to get out of participating, usually because they were afraid of looking foolish in front of the group. Well, she thought, maybe a little public embarrassment would motivate him to take training more seriously. "Oh, come on," she said, her tone taking on a slightly mocking edge. "It's just a friendly demonstration. I promise I'll go easy on you." She glanced around at the other students, a few of whom chuckled nervously. Besides, it's important for everyone to see what happens when proper technique meets, well, let's call it enthusiasm without experience. The other students shifted uncomfortably. Some seemed amused by what they perceived as playful banter between instructor and student, while others, particularly a few of the African American students in the class, recognized something different in Jasmine's tone, something that felt less like instruction and more like humiliation. Marcus stood still for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then, almost imperceptibly, something changed in his posture. It wasn't dramatic, just a subtle shift in the way he held his shoulders, the way his feet positioned themselves. If you weren't paying close attention, you might have missed it entirely. If you insist, ma'am, he said finally, stepping onto the mat. Jasmine positioned herself in the center of the training area, adjusting her GI with practiced precision. She fell into a textbook fighting stance, feet shoulder-width apart, hands up, weight balanced. It was perfect form, the kind that demonstrated years of dedicated training. Now, class, she began, her instructor voice taking over. Notice how I maintain proper distance and guard position. This is what real martial arts training looks like. She gestured toward Marcus, who stood opposite her in what could generously be described as a casual stance. Compare that to someone who hasn't put in the work to develop proper fundamentals. A few students laughed, though the sound felt forced in the suddenly tense atmosphere of the gym. Marcus didn't react to the slight, just stood there with that same calm expression he'd worn since the beginning of class. Don't worry, Jasmine continued, clearly enjoying herself now. I'll make sure not to hurt you. This is just about showing everyone what discipline and training can accomplish. What happened next? Well, I'm still not entirely sure how to describe it properly. Jasmine moved first, launching into a series of controlled strikes designed more for demonstration than actual combat. Her technique was undeniably impressive, crisp, fast, precise. Each punch and kick flowed seamlessly into the next, a textbook example of advanced martial arts form. But Marcus simply wasn't there when her techniques arrived. It wasn't dramatic evasion or flashy counters. He just seemed to shift slightly, almost casually, and Jasmine's carefully planned attacks found nothing but empty air. His movements were so minimal, so effortless, that for the first few exchanges, even Marcus himself seemed surprised by how easily he was avoiding her strikes. The students watching began to murmur among themselves. This wasn't what anyone had expected to see. Jasmine's confidence faltered slightly. She increased the speed and complexity of her combinations, her breathing becoming more labored as she tried to land even a single technique on her supposedly inexperienced opponent. But Marcus continued to move with that same unhurried precision, each evasion perfectly timed, perfectly placed. He wasn't showing off or making Jasmine look foolish. If anything, his expression suggested he was trying very hard not to embarrass her. What the hell? One of the students whispered, loud enough for several others to hear. Jasmine paused, breathing hard, sweat beginning to bead on her forehead. This wasn't going according to plan at all. She was supposed to be demonstrating her superior skill, not struggling to land a single technique on a beginner. Lucky dodges, she muttered, more to herself than to the class. Let's see how you handle some real pressure. This time, she abandoned the controlled demonstration approach and went at Marcus with genuine intent. Her strikes came faster, harder, with the kind of aggression that belonged in actual combat rather than a training exercise. And that's when Marcus finally moved with purpose. It was subtle at first, a slight shift in timing, a change in the angle of his evasions. But suddenly, Jasmine found herself off balance, overextended, her own momentum working against her. Marcus stepped to the side of one of her more aggressive punches, and with the gentlest possible touch, honestly, it looked like he barely made contact. He guided her forward motion just enough to send her stumbling past him. The gym fell completely silent. Jasmine caught herself before falling, spinning around to face Marcus with a mixture of confusion and growing anger. You got lucky, she said, her voice tight with frustration. Marcus shook his head slowly. Ma'am, maybe we should stop here. I think the demonstration has served its purpose. But Jasmine was beyond listening to reason now. Her reputation, her authority, everything she'd worked to build was being undermined by this quiet man who was supposed to be easy prey for her ego. No, she said firmly. We're not done yet. She came at him again, this time with real fury behind her techniques. Her strikes were no longer controlled demonstrations, but genuine attempts to overwhelm and dominate her opponent. Marcus's response was immediate and decisive. He moved like water flowing around stone, not aggressive, not showy, but with a fluid precision that made Jasmine's advanced techniques look clumsy by comparison. Every attack she launched seemed to create an opening that he somehow slipped through effortlessly. Then, almost too quickly for the observers to follow, Marcus stepped inside one of Jasmine's combinations and simply stopped. His hand rested gently against her solar plexus. Not a strike, not even pressure, just contact. But something about the placement, the timing, the absolute control it demonstrated made it clear that if he had chosen to follow through, the fight would have been over instantly. For several heartbeats, neither of them moved. Jasmine stared down at Marcus's hand, her face cycling through confusion, realization, and finally something that might have been fear. "Who are you?" she whispered. Marcus stepped back, lowering his hand. The casual demeanor he'd maintained throughout the class was still there, but now everyone could see what had been hidden underneath. The perfect balance, the controlled breathing, the way he held himself like someone who had never questioned his ability to handle whatever came his way. "Just someone who's been training for a while," he said quietly. One of the students, a young woman who'd been recording parts of the class on her phone, was frantically typing something into a search engine. Suddenly, her eyes went wide. "Oh my God," she breathed. "Marcus Williams, you're Marcus Ghost Williams. You won the light heavyweight championship at the National Combat Sports Federation 3 years running." The silence that followed was so complete you could probably hear someone breathing 3 blocks away. Marcus glanced at the student who'd identified him, then back at Jasmine, who was staring at him like he'd just materialized out of thin air. "I retired from competition after my last title defense," he said, his voice still maintaining that same respectful tone he'd used throughout the class. "I've been taking some time to figure out what comes next. Thought maybe I'd try learning something new, seeing martial arts from a different perspective." Jasmine's face had gone through several different shades of red and was now settling somewhere near burgundy. You knew. This whole time, you knew exactly what you were doing." "Ma'am, I tried to tell you this wasn't necessary," Marcus replied. "I didn't come here to show off or make anyone look bad. I just wanted to learn." The other students were whispering frantically among themselves now, some still looking up information about Marcus on their phones, others simply staring at the man who had just made their instructor look like an amateur. But it was what Marcus did next that really silenced the room. He walked over to where Jasmine was standing, still looking stunned and embarrassed, and offered her a respectful bow. "Thank you for the lesson, ma'am," he said. "I hope I can continue learning from you." I think that gesture, the genuine respect he showed even after she had tried to humiliate him, hit everyone harder than any of the physical techniques they'd just witnessed. Jasmine stared at him for a long moment, and you could almost see her wrestling with her pride, her embarrassment, and perhaps something else, maybe the realization that she'd become exactly the kind of instructor she'd once promised herself she'd never be. "I," she started, then stopped. "I owe you an apology." Marcus shook his head. "No, ma'am, you don't. You were doing your job as an instructor. Sometimes these things happen in training." But Jasmine wasn't having it. She turned to address the entire class, her voice unsteady but determined. "No, this isn't about training," she said. "This is about me making assumptions, about me trying to embarrass someone because I thought I could." She looked directly at Marcus. "I saw you standing there, and I made judgments about who you were and what you were capable of honestly, based on nothing more than the fact that you were new and you were quiet and you didn't fit my idea of what a serious martial artist looks like." The class remained silent, but there was a different quality to the silence now. Less shock, more attention. "I've been so focused on proving that I deserve to be here, that I deserve respect," Jasmine continued, "that I forgot the most basic principle of martial arts, respect for others, especially for people who might have something to teach me." Marcus started to speak, but Jasmine held up her hand. "Let me finish," she said. "What you just showed us, it wasn't just about technique or skill. It was about character. You could have made me look foolish. You could have put me in my place in front of everyone, but you didn't." She paused, searching for the word unprofessional. "You treated me with respect." She turned back to the class. "That's what real martial arts looks like. Not the flashy techniques or the belt rankings or the ego. It's about discipline and humility and treating people with dignity regardless of who they are or where they come from." One of the students, an older gentleman who'd been particularly quiet throughout the exchange, raised his hand tentatively. "Ma'am, if I may," he said, "I think what we just witnessed was exactly the kind of lesson we all needed to see." Others began nodding in agreement. The young woman who'd identified Marcus spoke up as well. "I've been training for 3 years, and I've never seen anyone handle a situation like that with so much, I don't know, grace." Marcus looked uncomfortable with the attention. "Really, everyone, it wasn't anything special. I just tried to avoid making a bad situation worse." But Jasmine shook her head. "No, Marcus. What you did was special. You had every right to be angry, to make me pay for trying to humiliate you. Instead, you showed restraint and respect that I didn't deserve." She paused, looking around at the assembled students. "And that's a lesson worth more than any technique I could teach." The conversation that followed was unlike anything that had happened in that gym before. Students who had never spoken to each other began sharing their own experiences with assumptions and prejudice, both as victims and as perpetrators. Marcus found himself at the center of it all, fielding questions not just about his fighting career, but about how he'd developed the kind of character that allowed him to respond to disrespect with dignity. "I think," he said at one point, "the hardest thing about being really good at something is learning when not to use that skill. Anyone can throw a punch or land a takedown. It takes real strength to choose not to." As the impromptu discussion continued, something interesting happened. The rigid hierarchy that had defined the gym's culture began to dissolve. Students were talking to instructors as equals, sharing experiences and insights without the usual deference to rank or belt color. Jasmine watched it all with a mixture of amazement and perhaps relief. For the first time in months, maybe years, she felt like she was part of a community rather than standing above it. When the class finally ended, nearly an hour later than scheduled, most of the students lingered, reluctant to leave the charged atmosphere that had developed. Marcus was gathering his things when Jasmine approached him. "I meant what I said about learning from you," she told him. "If you're willing to keep coming to classes, I'd like to make you a standing offer co-instructor status. I think there's a lot you could teach, not just about technique, but about what it really means to be a martial artist." Marcus considered the offer for a moment. "I appreciate that, but I'm not sure I'm ready to be teaching again. I came here to learn, remember?" "Maybe," Jasmine said, "we could learn from each other." I think that's when it really hit everyone what had just happened. This wasn't just about one person surprising another with hidden skills. It was about the moment a community realized it had been built on the wrong foundation and decided to start over. The story spread, of course. In the age of social media, a story like this doesn't stay contained to one gym for very long. Within days, the video that student had been recording was everywhere, along with dozens of think pieces about assumptions, respect, and what real strength looks like. But what didn't make it into those viral videos was what happened in the weeks that followed. Marcus did accept Jasmine's offer, though not in the way either of them had originally imagined. Rather than becoming a co-instructor, he started what he called conversation classes, sessions that focused less on physical technique and more on the mental and philosophical aspects of martial arts. These sessions drew people from all over the city, not just experienced fighters, but anyone interested in exploring questions of discipline, respect, and personal growth. The discussions were often intense, sometimes uncomfortable, but always honest. Jasmine found herself learning things she'd never encountered in all her years of training. Not about fighting techniques or competition strategies, but about leadership, humility, and the responsibility that comes with skill and authority. The gym's culture transformed almost overnight. The rigid hierarchies remained, but they were based on knowledge and wisdom rather than just belt color or physical ability. Students felt free to question techniques, share insights, and challenge assumptions without fear of being humiliated or dismissed. Perhaps most importantly, the incident became a touchstone for the community, a reminder that everyone has something to teach and something to learn, regardless of how they might appear on the surface. I've been thinking about that afternoon a lot lately, not just because of the physical demonstration, though that was certainly impressive, but because of how it illustrated something I think we all need to remember. It's easy to make assumptions about people. We see someone who's quiet or new or doesn't fit our preconceived notions of what an expert looks like, and we write them off. We miss opportunities to learn, to grow, to be challenged in ways that might make us better. Marcus could have walked into that gym on day one and announced his credentials. He could have demanded special treatment or respect based on his accomplishments. Instead, he chose to be just another student, to learn and grow alongside everyone else. And when confronted with disrespect and an attempt at humiliation, he could have responded with anger or retaliation. Instead, he chose grace. That's the real lesson, I think. Not that we should all be secretly accomplished fighters ready to surprise people who underestimate us, but that we should approach each other with curiosity rather than judgment, respect rather than assumptions. The afternoon that Marcus Williams silenced Elite Combat Academy wasn't really about fighting at all. It was about character and the choice to be better than our worst impulses. Jasmine learned that day that real authority comes not from the ability to dominate others, but from the wisdom to recognize when you're wrong and the courage to admit it. Marcus demonstrated that true strength isn't about what you can do to someone, but about what you choose not to do. And everyone else in that room learned that the most important battles aren't fought with fists or feet, but with patience, understanding, and the willingness to see beyond the surface of things. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is exactly what Marcus did that day. Remain calm, maintain your dignity, and let your character speak louder than your credentials. The gym is still there, still teaching martial arts, still drawing students from all over the city, but now it's known for something more than just fighting techniques. It's known as a place where people learn not just how to defend themselves, but how to be better human beings. And I think that's a lesson worth sharing. What would you have done in Marcus's position? Have you ever been in a situation where someone underestimated you based on their assumptions? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe for more stories about the power of character.